Pericles and Athens by A.R. Byrne, The Golden Age of Greece, seen through the life of our leading statesman. Chapter 11. A Shadow in the West. Pericles' position might be unique, but he never ceased to be attacked. The prosecutions of his friends were not only spite, they were, as we have seen, political moves intended to weaken Pericles' position by revelations. Damon, Anaxagoras, Phidias, they had all gone, and then came the unkindest cut of all, an attack on Aspasia. The prosecutor was the comic poet Hermippos, always one of her fiercest assailants. The charge? Impiety, possibly because she had been giving her girls the names of the muses. But Hermippos threw in for good measure the charge of assisting Pericles in amours with freeborn women, since she was doubly disqualified from speaking in her own defense. As an alien and as a woman, Pericles appeared for her. The violence and the foulness of the attacks made on the woman he loved out of jealousy of his work broke through even his armor of restraint, and when he spoke, he wept. The jury, experiencing an agreeable revulsion of feeling, acquitted Aspasia. Some democracy that they don't give women their say, and as much as primacy should be on. Well, obviously she's a citizen now, but an immigrant. Oh, it's an immigrant. Actually, wait, no, not maybe. You can. They changed the citizenship rules, didn't they? Yeah. So she wasn't a citizen. You have much worse situation in places like Saudi Arabia, where like 95% of the people aren't citizens, and it's like even people whose parents are born there don't necessarily be citizens. Pericles had won as usual, but there was something new and dangerous about the attacks of the 30s. Hermippos, a little later, joins in attacking Pericles with a politician who was anathema to the Tory Aristophanes. One Cleon, owner of a canning business, who was by way of representing the views of the people, not exactly of the poor. The official records show a man, probably his father, paying for a victorious choir at a festival in 469. But of the plain man, Cleon, violent, able, a good financer, with a deep mistrust of intellectuals, was a portent. Pericles, who had hitherto always followed that well-known maxim for radicals, never to let his left flank be turned, but was being attacked from the left at last. This was what distinguishes Pericles' last political battles from those earlier frays with Thucydides or Cimon. We must remind ourselves again of the political alignments in Athens. The Conservative Party in the Assembly was a country party, supported by land proprietors, whether rich squires or simply peasants. Pacific, because in war it might seem its farms spoiled by a Peloponnesian army. Unenthusiastic about foreign trade, which merely lowered the price of farm produce. Its extreme members anti-democratic and its leaders disposed to stand up for the rights of allies, largely from sympathy with the rich men in the cities who paid the League tribute. Against this party stood the Democratic Imperialist, a town bourgeois party consisting of all who made a living out of foreign trade or imperial service, including service on juries, and were aware that their lives depended upon imported food. Pericles had arisen with the rise of the latter party, but he knew that its most dangerous fault was overconfidence, readiness to embark on distant adventures that were often terribly costly in blood and treasure, so far as was consistent with keeping the empire, as in the war with Samos, and securing the people's food supply, as in the Black Sea expedition. Pericles was for peace. He had worked constantly to that end, at least since the days of the Egyptian disaster. Nearest to his heart was an ideal Athens, yet an Athens not far from realization in the singing and the athletics, the lyrical dramas and processions of the great festivals. The Athens, one may fairly say, of the Parthenon frieze. Athens, in his own phrase, an education to Greece. Surely in the end, without more fighting, every Greek community must see how much the greatest and fairest city of the world was Athens, and join willingly in one great league, of which Athens would be the head. So, we see that sort of principle in the Bible with the Thune, but the biblical Zionism is not so much of oh, look at our art and look at our sport. We can't just go out to war and fight. We can do a good sporting game too. This is not the shining example of the biblical Zionism. The shining example of the biblical Zionism, which goes beyond blood and soil, basically ignores that. Well, there's one verse that supports that, but over 200 that don't. So, I mean, if you're going to take one side of an issue according to the Bible, you should probably, it's sometimes, I mean, you think they would take the majority thing. And even if those verses weren't there, the principle behind it is like, what? You don't have to be righteous, huh? You don't have to be, it doesn't make the sense that people think it does. But intellectual can be a good factor to set oneself apart as. Well, so is physical, but, being set apart in terms of character. Pericles overestimated the strength of his own ideals as a political motive. He may also have overlooked the fact that the prosperous commercial life of Athens must tend to expand. Where there are 4 prosperous shoemakers, it is only natural if a 5th opens a business, and then, if the original 4 look out for more customers. Athens controlled, directly and politically, the channels of Greek trade through the Aegean, with the Black Sea and the Levant, but she also had, as we can tell from the distribution of Attic pottery, long since penetrated the markets of Italy and Sicily, even to the distant Etruria and Carthage, where trade had gone. Many dreamed of planting the flag. Many dreamed of planting the flag, and in their eyes, the colony at Thuria, the alliances with Augusta, Rhegion, and Leontinoi were only first steps in the right direction. And so the original MAGA, Make Athens Great Again, went beyond just, well, there were some good things a generation or two back that maybe we'd like to recover. Um, there are some good things that just aren't being done. Let's focus on that. So it seems like there was a more of a let's be better than ever before in certain areas, or even the point of being good in areas that's exceptional in areas that weren't even for consideration like that. Pericles opposed the wilder manifestations of Drang nach Westen, as he opposed any policy, however popular, that he deemed unsound or ill-timed, and so far he had been successful. He declined to register alarm or displeasure when the colony at Berea turned its back on Athens, proclaiming the god Apollo as its founder, or when Syracuse, in the early 30s, planned to develop her land forces and to increase her navy by 100 new triremes. The old alliances with Rhegion and Leontinoi were sufficient guarantees that Athens could intervene in the West if need arose. Athens, in Pericles' view, if not in Cleon's, was, in the language of the 1930s, a stated power. As for potential enemies, the Peloponnesian League had made no move in 440 BCE in support of Samos, and its chief naval power, Corinth, acclaimed credit at Athens for his non-intervention. Nothing important had changed between 439 and 435 BCE, and yet in 435 BCE began a chain of events leading to a war which ultimately crippled the growing power of the Hellenic world. How this came to pass is a question still debated by historians. Although we have one good first-hand authority, Thucydides, and a point even more conducive to unanimity, only one. Thucydides gives a lucid account of the events leading up to the war. But opines that behind him, as the truest cause, lay Sparta's fear of the growing power of Athens. This sounds reasonable, and yet Athens' pace. Thucydides was surely not so powerful now as before the Egyptian disaster, and if Sparta moved in 432 BCE, why not in 440? Is that what's trying to be said? Also, Thucydides' own narrative shows us that a reluctant Sparta, being badgered into war by Corinth herself, so recently pacific. Pacific? Okay, yeah, Pacific. No responsible Athenian, Spartan, or Corinthian, it is quite clear, wanted a general war, though some irresponsible people were not unwilling. As Thucydides grimly says, there had been no war for some time, so there were plenty of young men. But the war came, and during the last negotiations, Pericles himself urged Athens to refuse concessions. How did this come about? The answer seems to be through fear in diplomatic language, through the incompatible views of the Greek powers as to what was necessary for their security. Thucydides his account of Athens' reasons for taking the step that brought her into conflict with Corinth is that the Athenians, he does not actually say Pericles, considered that there was going to be another war with the Peloponnesians anyhow, and that, this being so, they wished to weaken potentially hostile natives and to secure a good position, the island of Corfu, on the way to Italy and Sicily. Now, if you oppress people and make them weak because you think at some point they may become our enemies, eventually that sort of oppression, you've likely made an enemy where you didn't have one, and that sort of repression can definitely lead to a slave rebellion, as you would call it. Well, they wouldn't necessarily be slaves, but you know what I mean. The rebellion of the townsfolk. The uprising of the people, yes. At the back of Athens, that is, of Pericles' mind, then was the West, and we must consider why. The 30 years' peace had left Greece divided, indeed, but with a fairly stable balance of power between the Delian and Peloponnesian leagues, the whale and the elephant. But outside the Greek and the Aegean world lay that Greek New World in Italy and Sicily, with its teeming cities, many of them larger, though politically less stable than any in old Greece except Athens herself. A new world which, if united on either side, at alliance with Athens, or under Dorian Syracuse, Saracessa, is that how you pronounce it? I have to look at the Greek. Friendly to Corinth and Sparta, might seriously upset the balance of the old. Economic motives were present only in the background, though not less real on that account. Corinth did not urge Sparta to war because Athenian trade was penetrating the West. It had been doing that for a century. Nor is there any reason to think that Cleon and his fellow tradesmen, interested in the West, though they were, desired to crush by armed force not a very formidable rival. The economic background of the mutual anxieties lay further back than that. Some of the Peloponnesian states, Thucydides shows us, required some important corn, kernels, and they got much of it from the West, paying largely in Corinthian manufacturers, Eastern re-exports, services, Arcadian mercenaries, and tourist traffic, Olympia. Athens had no reason to desire to cut off these supplies in peacetime, but the fear that she may be able to be properly preyed on many Corinthians' minds. At the same time, many at Athens, including Pericles, were increasingly conscious that their empire, for all the glamour of Athens, and for all Athens had done to impose democracy, was held down, in the last analysis, by force. Idealists like Pericles hoped that the hankering after the old autonomies was temporary. Realists like Cleon probably reckoned that it was permanent, a law of nature. Some simple people may have been unaware that it existed, but the politicians knew. This being so, the Athenians' feeling of security, that is, their confidence of continued freedom from want and from revenge by enemies, depended on their navy. That navy exceeded in numbers and vastly excelled in quality. All the other navies of old Greece, the long walls were impregnable, and so Athens felt safe. But if the naval strength and immense shipbuilding capacity of the West were thrown into the scale, she would feel safe no longer. Hence the alliances with Leon Tinoi, Rhegion, and Egesta. Pericles' policy was a peace policy, but he kept a foot in the door. The Peloponnesians did, in fact, when war came, propose to use their Sicilian allies for a prodigious building program, up to a total of 500 remes. Athens' total strength, first line and reserve, was 300, plus 100 from Chios and Mytilene. But nothing came of the scheme, and the strategy bequeathed by Pericles to his successors of supporting the anti-Saracusan bloc, Syracusan, how most people would say it, I'd have to see the Greek, with Moses' forces, proved quite sufficient to keep Syracuse employed. But it was not until 14 years after Pericles' death that Athens, under the reckless leadership of Alcibiades, made a serious effort to conquer the West, and then the Peloponnesian reaction was vigorous and disastrous to Athens. In 435, then neither Athens nor the Peloponnesians wanted war, and neither was, in fact, trying to mobilize the West against the other, but there was mutual mistrust. When therefore in 433, Corinth, with their long-standing interest in the northwest of Greece proper, took action which appeared to Pericles likely to change the balance of naval power and the position on the western route, Pericles advised Athens to offer unyielding opposition. Corinth now, in turn, felt herself menaced with encirclement, and succeeded in convincing Sparta and her other allies that the restless and aggressive Athenian democracy was a menace to them all. The Greek state that was to play the part of bleeding Kansas in this rivalry for the West. Kerkura, or Corfu, was an ancient colony of Corinth, founded, it was said, at the same time as Saracusa, and before the newer colonies of Leucas and Ambracia, but subsequent relations with the mother city had been bitter. Corinth, unlike most Greek states, had kept her nearer colonies dependent, and even sent out annual governors to them. In distant Saracusa, Corinth had never attempted such a step, and Saracusa remained independent and friendly. But at Kerkura, in the intermediate position, Corinth tried and failed. The result had been wars of independence, separation, and bitter animosity. Kerkura, with her spacious and beautiful inland territory, ample rainfall, and position of the coasting route to Italy had prospered exceedingly, and was now the second naval power in Greece. She could raise, at a pinch, 123 remes. She had always avoided entangling alliances, but Corinth had not forgotten nor forgiven. Farther up, the Illyrian coast, by modern Durazzo, lay the colony of Epidamnos, planted by Kerkara, probably when subject to the great tyrants of Corinth. The house of Cupselos, the official founder, agreeably to ancient etiquette, had been a Corinthian. In or before 435, Epidamnos had a revolution. The people drove out their aristocracy, and the latter made common cause with the neighboring Il 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 al Il Il lul E Il lul Il lor Il lor Illyrians Illyrians Illyrians, yeah, and began a guerrilla war on the city by land and sea. The Democrats, finding themselves hard pressed, appealed to Kerkara, but through their envoys took the solemn step of casting themselves as suppliants before the altars of the city. Kerkara declined to help them. The Kerkarians do not appear to have been an amiable people. The Epidamnians now, after consulting Delphi, which was proper form, threw themselves at the mercy of Corinth, as being also, in a way, their mother city. The Corinthians accepted the protectorate gladly from every point of view, for economic reasons, and also, not least, out of willingness to annoy Kerkara, and they sent a force of volunteers from Corinth, Leucas, and Ambracia, who, going chiefly by land, by what is now Arta Janina Valona route, for fear of the Kerkarians, reinforced Epidamnos. And something that is don't let mediums and oracles control you. You can use these things as some of these things as, what comes through as a reference for symbolic thinking and free association or something, but don't wait to make a decision, or like the rolling of the dice or something like that is going to be divinely or well, I guess it would be divinely ordained, but not in the way that it has a special message for you. You're going to come up with a message, or the reader is going to come up with a message, but Eliphas Levi said, the sage does not consult the oracle, the sage controls the oracle. And then Kerkara didn't intervene. The Epidamnian exiles had been there with a counter embassy, and by appealing to old family ties with the leading men of Kerkara, they met with more success, having no desire to see Corinthian influence established so far north. The Corinthians peremptorily ordered the new settlers to leave Epidamnos, and meeting with a refusal, set down to besiege it. Corinth then mobilized in earnest. In addition to her own navy and those of her colonies, she called for her assistance from her allies. Ships and men came from Megara and Epidauros, Troezen and Hermion, and economic assistance also from Thebes and Elis. The shock waves spreading outwards from the trouble at Epidamnos were now reaching a wide area. Sparta began to take notice, and anxious to check a dispute which might have unpredictable consequences, gave her support to Correan ambassadors at Corinth. They called upon Corinth to withdraw her troops and settlers from Epidamnos as being outside her proper sphere of influence, and offered to submit the whole dispute to the Delphic oracle or to neutral arbitration. Otherwise said, the Correans, if menaced by a coalition, they would have to change their policy and seek alliances where they could. This could only mean an appeal to Athens. Corinth, however, demanded that Caracalla should first withdraw her troops from Epidamnos. Caracalla refused, but proposed a local armistice. The Corinthians refused in turn, sent a herald with a formal declaration of war, and put to sea with 75 triremes. It was a fatal miscalculation. Caracalla had a larger navy than Corinth, and launching every available ship, some of them old, met the allies with 80 galleys, while 40 more kept up the blockade of Epidamnos. Off Leukeme, the south cape of Caracalla, the islanders won a complete victory. They followed it up with a fierce naval offensive, harrying the coast of Leucas until Corinth was forced to maintain garrisons there, and burning Calenne, the naval port of Elis, which had lent ships to the expedition. On the very day of the battle, it is said, Epidamnos capitulated. The Correans kept the Corinthian settlers as prisoners